Good afternoon. I'm so excited to have Abby Zachritz here today of Advocacy Abby. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about this podcast today because you provide not just an incredible story, which we will get into, but a really beautiful representation of how life can give you lemons and you make lemonade out of it and you make the world a better place. So the first half of this conversation, I'd love for you to be able to explain more your story because I feel like there's more than people may see on Instagram, as well as, and then towards the back half of the the meeting or the podcast, we'll just talk more about how you're supporting families because you provide a really incredible resource to families that are navigating very, very bumpy waters, and no one expects to be in those situations, and you're helping them kind of chart forward. So I would love for you, Abby, to introduce yourself, and we begin to kind of tell a little bit of your story.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to meet you as well. Well, let's see. I guess my story, I'll start when me and my husband met. We met in college in Tennessee, and in 2003, we were married, and a few years later, we started having a family. In 2007, we had our daughter, and then we had another son, and then we had another son, and then we had another son, and then we had another son.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, a lot of kids, a lot of boys, but we were super excited. I was actually pregnant with my fourth child, and we went from living in Fort Myers for about 10 years, and we decided to move to Gainesville, Florida. And that is when I was about 7 months pregnant with my fifth child, Luke. My fourth child, Wyatt, at 18 months, fell into our pool. We had only lived there, I think we had moved there in August, and this was in April of 2014. And as you can imagine, it was a total nightmare. We found him and began to work on him. I think God that I knew CPR, and we began working, called 911, and just miracle after miracle started happening. The fire department just happened to be at a really simple call, and they were only 3 minutes away, where normally they would have been about 20 minutes to get to us.
Wow.
And so they were there really fast, and ambulance showed up, and I got in the ambulance, and we began to drive to the emergency room, Shands, University of Florida Hospital. And I didn't know what was going on. I have no medical background or anything like that. And so I just knew they kept working on him. And they sent me into a waiting room, and they took him into the emergency room, and they were working. I have no idea how long it was. I do now, but I didn't know at the time. And I was just on my face, completely wet, big bellied, pregnant, just on my face, crying and begging God to save my son. And the nurse came in, and she said, "Hey, you have to, your son's not doing well." And I began to scream, and she was really tough. She said, "You need to stop now, or we will not let you in the room." And so I immediately, tears went back into my eyes because I was going to see my baby. And they said, "We want you to come say bye to him." And so I came into the room, and my baby was laying there with, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 professionals around him. Everybody was trying their best, but they were unable. And I just began to cry, "Jesus, save my son, save him, save him." And the doctor, who had been there 17 years, and all this information came to me later, he had seen near drownings every day, or drownings every day. It's very common. Nobody talks about it. It's actually the number one cause of death under the age of 4. And so he said, we're going to look at his heart again. And there was already gel on his chest. I remember that specifically. And they put the instrument on him so we could see his heart. And he said, "Look, Mom." And I was confused because his heart was beating. And all of a sudden the room got very busy, and they ushered me out, and they said, "Your son's alive. We have to work on him." And so went upstairs and waited for him to come to the PICU. And we found out later, the doctor actually sat with us and he said he's been there 17 years and he's literally never seen this happen. They had already called it. They had done a procedure. They said, I guess this is pretty typical. They asked the person that was doing compressions to do compressions until I walked in and then to show them stopping. And that's when I began to scream, save my baby. Like, and I knew they were stopping. And he had never seen a child come back to life like that, ever. And so they said, the next 24 hours are going to be incredibly intense. And it was. He was put on a cold bed. It's where they basically keep your body really, really cold to prevent swelling and stuff from your brain. And after 3 days, they stopped that, and then they began other things. And we were told, hey, he's going to be in a vegetative state, and he's not going to be able to control his body. He's pretty much gone. But those 3 days, they said after 3 days, we'll know for sure. And those 3 days, he didn't go. And he kept fighting, and his little body, they'd said he's never going to be able to breathe on his own. They took off the mask. He was able to breathe on his own. They said that just thing after thing they said would be, just wasn't. And so they stopped saying it. They said, we don't know what to expect with him. He definitely has a major brain injury. They could see that on the MRI. Actually, most of his brain was completely affected. And they said, he'll always be on this medicine or that medicine. And thing after thing just start coming on, and they couldn't explain it. And so after 52 days in the PICU intensive unit, we went to Brooks Rehab, and they sent us home and said, they also had never seen anything like this happen. They'd never seen a child last 40 minutes without oxygen. They had never seen him come back to life. They had no medical explanation. Matter of fact, it says spontaneous heartbeat on his record. And after 40 minutes, we went to intensive for 52 days, and then went to the intensive, and they said, there's not much we can do. He has no swallow. We don't know how to help him. And so we just began on this journey, and friends started to send me like little things about hyperbaric oxygen therapy and stem cell therapy and things that are really non-traditional. And I brought these up to the doctors at the hospital and said, hey, what do you think about these approaches? And they're like, we don't really know. Like, they're newer approaches. And what me and my husband found out was medicine was about 10 years. New things were about 10 years behind practicing medicine. Right. And so things that are happening now were just starting to be looked at when my son had his accident. Yeah. And so we began this journey of recovery.
I just have to ask you, what do you attribute this to? Like, the fact that he defies all of that. Like, how did he do that?
I believe God, like, he saved him. It was miraculous. Like, there wasn't an explanation. And it wasn't, I tell people that, like, it was a miracle, but it wasn't because, like, I was this great woman of faith and I walked in all confident. I was a hot mess, screaming, crying, barefoot, covered in water from the pool. And no one has an explanation. I've talked to doctors since. They actually told me that there was a nurse that was working in the PICU floor, and they said, get a bed ready for the baby. There's a baby coming in that was a drowning. We're going to need you to prep, because they go fast in these units. And they got the call saying the baby died. Like, we don't have a room for him, so they stopped. And then they got another call saying, no, the baby's alive. And so my son Wyatt he's a walking miracle, and he inspires a lot of people.
Yeah. So I want to stay in those 52 days that he was in the PICU, and my guess is that word was spreading rapidly.
Yeah.
You have a big family, you're involved in the community. What was happening? What was the support that was coming your way? And what was the support that you needed in those moments?
Well, I was also pregnant, very pregnant. And like the worst trauma I've ever been through in my life. So I had a lot of friends that would come and visit. Well, I didn't know this was happening. My community kind of just took over. We were newer there. We'd only lived in Gainesville 6 months.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of community come up from Fort Myers. And honestly, in Gainesville, they just like poured out. But I was getting calls from Turkey, from people they had taken trips to the Vatican and were asking for prayers for him there. People were calling from all over, and our immediate needs. I had 3 other kids in school, in preschool or being just taken care of. My mother-in-law, our family came up, but everybody was kind of doing things, just the best they could. So I had a friend that took it upon herself to just start picking up my kids from school. I had people brought meals from all over. I mean, I didn't know all the people. I had a woman who, she didn't know me. She had heard about the story. Churches and just different communities started talking about it because it was pretty impactful, especially to the medical community, because they had not seen anything like this. And people just felt moved. I had a woman, while we were in the PICU, set up for our family to be able to stay in a condo while we were in intensive in Jacksonville, that I had never known her.
Wow.
We had
random acts
of kindness all over. We had a schedule for, because I was pregnant and I wouldn't sleep because I was scared. And when you're in a hospital, you need to know what's happening. And doctors and nurses don't stop caring for your kid when you're sleeping 9 to 5. They do it all 24 hours, especially when you're as critical as my son was. And so I was scared that a decision would be made or something would happen and I wouldn't be awake, so I wouldn't sleep. And I was very pregnant. So my friend set up a schedule that they would stay in the room overnight awake so that I could sleep. So that if a doctor came in, they'd wake me. Wow. So I was just so scared to miss anything, So our community was clutch. Just wonderful.
How were your other kids processing all of this?
I don't even think it truly set in for a few years. They would say a lot, because my oldest at the time was in first grade. Mm-hmm. She had a great teacher, which helped a lot. She processed a lot at school. My other kids were very young. I mean, one was 2, almost 3. One was, he actually turned 3. I came out of the hospital to celebrate his birthday and then went back. And then one was 4 in VPK. So I don't think they fully understand. Even now, to this day, like if I ask them what they recall, it's kind of more what they heard versus actual memories. I think they were just waiting for Wyatt to get better and they didn't understand. And honestly, I didn't understand. I had never been around anyone with a brain injury. So I kept waiting for the snap moment where you in the movies, they wake up. And it's just not like that. It's gradual, it's slow, it's healing. It takes time, a lot of time. I mean, he's still healing and it's been 10 years.
So I think oftentimes when these traumatic moments happen, people are trying to figure out what to do and how to help. And if you go to the person that's going through this major trauma, they're likely not going to be able to respond because it's taken over. It's too traumatic for you to process what's going on. You're trying to literally survive everything emotionally that you're going through. Having been through everything that you experienced with Wyatt, especially in those early days, how do you recommend supporters show up for people that are finding themselves in these incredibly sudden and traumatic moments?
Yeah, I would recommend having a point person, somebody that loves you and that you love, that's willing to communicate. So one of the things that happened right away was some people within my church set up a Facebook page just to update what was happening with Wyatt.
Right.
No, I mean, when it first happened, we didn't know if it'd be 3 days and we'd be home.
Right.
Or if we weren't coming home with our kid. And so she would just say, they were able to take this drug off or pray he's doing really bad right now or whatever it was. And then about a weekend, people started coordinating meals and stuff. And so having somebody that could do those things, because there was so many people that wanted to help in such a quick amount of time. And I had no idea. I mean, there was always food brought into me in the room, but I had no idea who made it. And and it wasn't out of lack of care. It was out of I couldn't even think past the hour, much less what are you going to feed the other kids, and are they okay at home, and who's picking them up.
And who was that person? Was it a friend? Was it a family member?
I had lots of people, honestly. My mother-in-law, she was there a lot. I had my one girlfriend really took on the role of my kids because they happen to be in similar schools or near preschool, so she took it on. People at the church, and honestly, I wouldn't even be able to tell you everybody that coordinated things. Somebody, I think it was a girlfriend at church, set up the schedule for moms to come and stay with me at the hospital.
Wow.
But it was them. They took that off me. They're like, and just did it.
Yeah.
Which helped a lot.
Well, and what I love about this story is that people realize that the kids, your other kids, had to maintain some sense of routine. You know, that they had to go to school. They had to keep going despite all the things that were going on around them. As obviously you were incredibly distracted, as you should have been. But that also meant that other people had to play this caregiver role.
Yeah.
And for all the other things. And I think that's such a beautiful illustration of what a community is supposed to look like.
It's life-changing. I can't imagine if we didn't have somebody making sure my other kids were safe. I couldn't imagine having to choose between my child in the hospital or 4 at home, or 3 at home at the time. Like, I can't imagine. So I'm forever grateful.
So you have this crazy experience, inpatient, miracle after miracle happening. I'm sure there's a very harsh reality of also the cost that gets accumulated in that. Can you talk to me a little bit more about like coming out of the hospital, bills, like what was that feeling like when you saw, okay, Wyatt's going to live, and now we have to figure out how we're actually going to pay for not just what has happened, but also what's to come.
Yeah. So we immediately had to change our jobs for him to be able to afford to protect us from some of the bills, because he had accrued over $1 million in bills.
Wow.
And so we had to get him state insurance really quickly. And so we just had to change a lot of things there. But when we came out of the hospital, what I found was a lot of the things my son needed to recover, because they'll pay for things that are like very standard care, but this is not a standard injury. And he needed above and beyond a lot of things. He needed more frequency on therapies. He needed equipment at home that we had. Nobody thinks of special seating. Like, you don't realize that your child now sits different than a person does typically. And if you don't get him those seating, not only will he not be able to sit, but he'll deteriorate. So it's not really like this luxury, well, we want this special seat. It's he has to have this seat. He has to have this bath chair. He has to have these supplements for his brain. He has to have these things. And so that cost started adding up really quickly, to go from potty training to being in diapers. Like, these things and it happens overnight, and you don't realize you're buying meals while if you're driving from place to place, you're getting your coffee late at night, you're buying all this stuff every single day. And it just really accumulates quickly. And then we really started to see, when we started to push forward on therapies that we were starting to see double cross studies on, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It's not covered, not one drop, by insurance. Wow. And so those are anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 a week. And there's lots of things like that are very effective, especially for TBIs and noxic injuries, that nothing's covered for. So that's when we really started saying, okay, a hyperbaric chamber in our home, that's $25,000. And these are just, he's done all these things. And so we slowly started to see, all right, we're going to need to do something. We're going to need to fundraise. We don't have these reserves. Any reserves we have are gone. And so that's when our community once again kind of came into play.
Wow. So it sounds like all of this entire experience led you down this path of realizing just how challenging and confusing, overwhelming it is for families that suddenly find themselves in this place. to find funding. You know, some people are very blessed with communities that will give and give and give, and they still need more. For some families, community is harder to come by, and therefore they're reliant on grants and special assistance programs. And what we know about healthcare is that it's not designed to be easy.
Right.
So I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your own journey and finding these grants and programs that would allow your family and Wyatt to continue all of these remedies and equipment that you knew that you were going to need to sustain throughout his life. Like, how did you start to kind of evaluate this? And then, of course, I want to get into what that has led to.
Yeah. So I think the first thing we tried to get our son to right away, so like I mentioned, we'd already spent our reserves. We bought the special seating right away. We had gotten, special chairs, special bolsters, things for him to do therapies in. We had immediately enrolled him as quick as we could into all the things that we thought would therapeutically help him recover. And then people started sending me articles. My best friend sent me an article on hyperbaric chambers, and we started researching that. And we found a local place to do dives, and it was about $150 a pop, and they recommend 4 to 5 times a week. And so if we're driving an hour to get there to do an hour dive, then come home, it just was, we're like, we really need to just buy our own chamber. But we wanted to see the world's leader in it, Dr. Harch, who's in New Orleans, to see the right protocol, to make sure we're doing it right before we're going to invest all this money. And so it was kind of double approach. We got the chamber, and then we raised funds and had grants to help us get to Dr. Harch. And so I think I kind of stumbled upon, I don't know if the owner of this grant reached out to me, but it's called Live Like Jake Foundation. And they help children that have had near drownings. They help all kids get swim lessons that can't afford them, so they can learn infant swim rescue, so they can flip and float. Did that with my youngest son as soon as we could. I'd highly recommend it. And so they're expensive, and so they offer ways for people to get those no matter what, which is amazing. But they also provide grants for kids that have survived near drownings. And so they've helped us time and time again get to therapies and places. And so kind of stumbled upon that one. I think a friend of a friend told me about it. And then I started realizing there's this entire world of grants. And so we would fundraise. So we fundraised for our chamber, but we also had grants chip in towards it. And so it would be, usually our bigger ticket items would be dual approach. Some of them would be completely covered by grants, but some we would have to have our community come in. And it was always encouraging to our community when we said, hey, we got this grant for $5,000. Now we have to hit another $10,000 to do this. Can you help us do this? And they would come alongside, especially when people saw like, okay, there's already been a step forward. Like, we want to keep helping you get there. And so
you were really kind of observing how the community responded to your fundraising efforts, where it was almost like a partnership versus just this one way of like, hey, we have this goal, can you help fund it? And that's that. It sounds like you were taking a little bit more of a more dynamic and frankly transparent approach of, hey, we have this fundraising need. This is what we've been able to secure so far. And here's the kind of the excess or the remainder that we would need help with.
Exactly.
And it sounds like the community was incredibly receptive towards that.
Yeah, I've done several fundraising campaigns because we've had to. And so we try to be very honest about like, this is what we need. This is exactly the cost. This is where it's going. Grants give to organizations directly. So it's not like it comes to the parent. 99% of them. So we show like, this is the receipts. We just show people this is what we need. And I think when people know it actually can be attained, that would be a question. Do you think you'll get to the goal? My answer is always absolutely. Yeah.
How did you overcome, or was it ever, let me ask you for first question. Was it uncomfortable for you to go to your community to ask for money?
Yes. I think it's uncomfortable for anybody. Me and my husband are capable people. We have degrees. We've had experience in the work field. We had jobs. But it is so outside the normal typical families do not have to do this. This is not normal. This is not budgeted into normal spending.
Yeah.
You know, this is extraordinary, and extraordinary calls for extraordinary. And that's one thing I have learned, though, is people want to give. They want to help. They want to serve. And so I think me doing the grant part showed my desire, like searching for these things, trying to find these things, my desire to also help ourselves.
Right.
Like to reach these foundations that I say, hey, you do XYZ, we'll give you this grant. I was willing to do that. I was willing to put in any money we had. And our community just responded with such graciousness of, yeah, we will too.
Yeah. So again, I think what I'm hearing is that your community responded really well for you showing initiative. You know, you were showing the initiative. You were showing the drive.
Yeah.
You weren't looking for a handout. You weren't looking at this as charity. You were looking at this as truly a partnership and a community opportunity to help kind of for all that to come together.
Yeah. And I think part of that was I was constantly telling them where we were. Every day I posted. I think it's really important if you're doing something, you're asking people to come alongside you, that you let them know where you are. They are your partners in this. Like they wanted to know how I was doing after treatment. They wanted to know what it was like in the chamber. So I was updating them as it was going. And I want people to see like, hey, your resources literally has helped save my son's life. And I mean, it's true of every single treatment we've been to, every piece of equipment, every single thing people have donated towards has helped my son's life.
I think one of the things I love the most that I'm hearing is, again, there's such a stigma about asking for help, but there's especially a stigma about asking for money. People, like you said, you all had jobs, you all had degrees, you're not the type of family that ever anticipated being in this place where you needed to fundraise from friends and family and colleagues and neighbors. That is so uncomfortable. I think it is so admirable that you were able to kind of swallow that, accept that reality, and, like you said earlier, invite people into the journey, invite them to be a part of this blessing that Wyatt is, to save his life. Yeah. And I think so often that gets overlooked because our ego and our pride takes over, when in fact it is completely acceptable for a middle-class family or higher to still have financial needs, that it is still okay to ask for help, even if it doesn't look like you should need help on paper.
Yeah.
And you just said it, these things are so expensive.
Well, I think any mom, if you say, here, you put them at a crossroads and you say, here's a path to healing, but you're going to have to ask for money, you're going to have to ask for resources. Or you can stay on the path and not ask, and this is your end result. I think any mom is going to choose that path every day. I mean, I know I can handle swallowing my pride. What I couldn't handle was not seeing him have every opportunity to recover. Anything that was going to give him that chance, I wanted him to have that.
Yeah. So you're accumulating all of this knowledge. You're seeing all of these grants.
Yeah.
Then what?
Then I started getting phone calls or really direct messages on Facebook from parents that said, hey, this child had an ear drowning. This person had this. I saw you did this, because I was sharing this stuff in our Facebook page, Wyatt's journey. And so people would hear about it and see it, and they say, I saw you did this. I saw you did that. How did you get there? Oh my gosh, how did you afford that? How could you afford, $10,000 to go see this or go there? And I said, no, you can. This is how you do it. And I would tell them about this grant or this foundation. And I was telling them one at a time. And people, I've probably one at a time had 40, 50 different families that I helped that way. Just try this grant, try this foundation. Hey, when you fundraise, make sure you do this. And people would be successful. And they, these grants would come through as they always did. And they would get these treatments for their kids. And so I started realizing like, hey, I think I could do this on a bigger, I could help more than one at a time, right? I could help a lot of people at once, because I'm telling each of these people the same information.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that kind of started my journey with sharing with grants and foundations and resources.
So why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about Advocacy Abby?
Okay, so back in December, I just started of 2023. I decided I really want to start I'm just going to put all my knowledge out on Instagram. And so I just started posting. I think I did 30 for 30. I'm going to post one grant every day for 30 days and see what happens. And the response from the community was insane. First of all, I had no idea so many people didn't know about a lot of these things. People that have been paying out of pocket or going to great lengths to get things covered for their family.
Yeah.
Had never heard of these grants, these foundations, these resources. And so I just immediately got excited and was like, I can do this. I can do more. And so from there, I started, in the DMs, just direct messaging moms back and forth. And then that became incredibly a lot. It just became overwhelming. So I was like, I need to create something. And so I started creating courses and different ways, just showing people how we started to not only save money, but get grants and resources to families, find the funding, and then how to effectively fundraise. That's one of the things, like I'll hear people say, I started, this fundraising campaign, and we raised a little bit, but we never saw much from it. And I would look at their page, I'd say, well, this is why. And I could evaluate pretty quickly why they weren't successful, and kind of went back to the drawing board and just started doing coaching and consulting and started working with companies that actually cared about their patients. They'd say, hey, we have this patient or client that needs this device and they can't afford it, but they really need it. Could you help them? And the answer was yes. And so it's just evolved since then.
I love it. I love it. I think there's something just so powerful about taking this nightmare experience and turning it into such a net positive for so many families, not just navigating the specific circumstance that Wyatt went through and you went through, but all sorts of circumstances, right? Like you serve all different types of disabilities and diagnosis. Is that accurate?
Yeah, rare disease. I've learned so much, actually. One of the things that I found during our journey was I really like to learn from other diagnoses, diseases, disabilities, because some of the therapies or approaches that they're doing sometimes was really good for my son. But if I stayed in my box of this is what near drowning victims do, then I wouldn't have started doing different approaches therapeutically that are really good for autism diagnosis, but it also is really, really good for kids like my son. Yeah. And so I learned that we sharpen each other. We can, really learn from one another. And so that's how I found a lot of grants. A lot of them aren't, if I just looked in the label near drowning, I never would have found tons of different grants that my son qualifies for. And so, yeah, I've been working with a lot of different people, from rare diagnosis to spina bifida to clubfoot to, you actually recently have started working with a lot of people that have had the cancer diagnosis, and just seeing a lot of fruit of being able to help people wherever they are on their journey.
Yeah, I think it's just so amazing because, again, I don't think anyone expects to be in this situation. Yeah. No one, you don't anticipate being in this position trying to support a child or support a loved one or a caregiver. You're suddenly a caregiver.
Right.
And there's no playbook on these things.
None. Matter of fact, that was one of the biggest things that I hear till this day is, I don't know what to do. Like, nobody tells you. They send you home and they say, this is how you currently care for them, but they don't tell you what to expect. They don't tell you what to do next. You're just kind of out there. And so Advocacy Abby has been a place where people have started to talk in the comments, started to discuss things, help each other, share ideas. That it's been a journey. It's one of those things, like, I really believe that God can make beauty out of ashes. And so when you have everything burned down, you have two choices. You can live in that and stay there, or you can decide to get up. Your community comes around you and you go forward. And so it can be a traumatic event once, or it could be for life. And we've chosen it happened, and now we're going to go forward. My son's a fighter, and he has continued to fight every day of his life. And we've told him, as long as he's willing to fight, we're willing to fight with him. And so I want to be a place. I want Advocacy Abby to be a place where people can come and not feel alone, and to have that support.
I said this to you last time we talked, but I really think you could change your Instagram account to Admirable Abby because it is incredibly admirable. And it takes a lot of strength to lean into this the way that you have. And you are a blessing to your audience. And I hope to see you continue to grow so that you can share more of this wonderful knowledge with more of the world that desperately needs this help. And how lucky Wyatt is to have a mom like you. I mean, it's to have someone, a mom that just sticks by your side to fight like that. I'm sure there are moments where you just, not that you want to give up, but that you're tired.
Yeah, it's hard.
You just have to keep giving and giving and giving. And while I don't know what that's like, I know that it takes an enormous amount of strength to push through every day. So thank you for what you do. And thank you for allowing Support Now and myself to share more about you and your story and Advocacy Abby.
Oh, thanks for sharing, and thanks for everything you guys are doing to help so many.
Thank you.